Hey, hi everyone. My keynote is called Actions Speak Louder Than Code. Since you've already heard an intro, I'm just going to get started. So when I was 8 years old, my parents moved to a new neighborhood called Fresh Meadows. And as you can imagine from the name, it was a very storybook residential village with parks and walkways and a local shopping center and a public library. And this is me when I was around 8 years old. It's not Fresh Meadows, but as you can see, the enthusiasm is more or less the same today. Since I was new to the neighborhood and I was also transferring to a new school, I didn't have any friends at the time. The first friend I made was a lovely little girl named Gloria. And Gloria and her family were originally from South Korea. And we first met in the Big Kid Park, where we shared a love for the swings. She quickly became my best friend. We played together after school, and on weekends her mom would invite me over, and I would eat all kinds of traditional Korean food like seasoned seaweed and kimchi. I remember the summer of first grade really well. We laid back on the grass and pointed out the shapes of clouds to each other. Gloria would bring ramen noodles with her. She'd sneak them out from the kitchen. We'd crack them open, sprinkle over the seasoning, and eat them raw. We really liked crunchy things, and we never really knew why we were getting stomach aches. The year I met Gloria was the year that I was 8 years old, and the year that I was 8 years old was also 2001, which was the year that 9/11 happened. I remember the morning of 9/11, I was sitting in the front of my dad's 1960s Volvo. We were stuck in a traffic jam in Flushing, New York, and if some of you know Flushing, it's always a traffic jam. And I was on my way to my second day of second grade. And I was really, really excited, and I do that thing when I'm excited where I keep talking so fast where I don't take a breath. And my dad's like, "Shush, it's the morning, I need to listen to the news." So as always, on the morning ride, he would turn on AM 880, which is the local New York City NPR news station. And that's when we heard about the first plane that crashed into the Twin Towers. And as you can imagine, the rest of my life after that can be categorized as growing up post 9/11 in New York City. It was a couple of weeks after 9/11 that I finally saw Gloria again. I waited for her as usual at the park where we always hung out. It was an autumn afternoon and there was this hazy golden glow on the park, and it felt very storybook-like. When Gloria came, her mother was with her. She came up to me, she handed me her half of our friendship bracelet and an unopened pack of ramen noodles. "We can't be friends anymore," she told me, "because my mother says you're a terrorist." I remember feeling so angry and so hurt, and it was so awful, and I was so confused. It wasn't the first time that I had encountered that kind of fear and hate. It was a kind of an everyday thing at that point. There were reporters who came to school on the days after 9/11. There were people in the streets who would tell you to go back to your own country. There were people who threw rocks, and there were these boys in Fresh Meadows that would drive by and throw raw eggs at me when I was walking home from school. And I remember one particular day where it hit my scarf and our uniform was white. So instead of going home, I walked all the way to the library, went to the bathroom, washed out my scarf, and went home and told my dad that I went to the water park and didn't tell him what actually happened. So when he hears this recording, he'll know what really happened that day. It wasn't something new, but it was a lot harder when it came from Gloria. I feel like fear and prejudice took away one of my first best friends, and that stayed with me for a lot of years. That day in the park, though, I just stood there and didn't defend myself. I just kind of watched her walk away. It took me several years to come to terms with that and how that affected my identity. And I still remember Gloria now and then. When I shop at Arirang, my local Korean grocery store, I remember her when I made kimchi soup or savored the taste of seaweed noodles. I think I remember her more now, not because of who she was or because of our friendship, but because she's a symbol of this struggle with my identity and understanding who I am in the world that I live in. She was the first person that I think I lost to fear and to hatred and to prejudice, and losing her was a moment that stayed with me until today. My college application letters were titled "Eating Ramen Raw," and they were an ode to talking about representation and identity and how I was still figuring out where I could belong. I asked myself, where do I belong? Am I Pakistani, as my parents are heritage? Am I American, because I grew up here? If we were to go back to those years, to the early 2000s, and create a Venn diagram of these two identities, the ideal place to live would be in that intersection. That was the place that I wanted to be. what we now call Asian American or Pakistani American. But I felt that growing up, there was no space or acceptance of that intersection in that society. There is now, and I'm really grateful for that. I found this art online, and I thought it really spoke to the kinds of things that go through my mind when I think about identity. It's hard to see what the speech bubbles say, but some of them will say, "You'll never get a good job. You should get married." These are things you'll hear from the Pakistani community. "Why are you working? You should be at home." And on the other side, you'll hear people say, "You'd look prettier without your hijab," or "I don't know why you have to wear it," or "Why are you even working?" and things like that. But what I loved about this image was, nevertheless, she persisted. That after hearing all those things, you have to stay true to who you are. And that can be really hard. In the Muslim community, when we talk about growing up post 9/11, we call it growing up in a world where people have already decided who you are. Like, you've already been presumed guilty for a crime that you didn't commit. It was a time when Muslim parents cautioned their daughters not to wear hijab, not to attend after-school clubs, and not to come home before dark. It was a time when my dad, uncharacteristic, told me, "Don't take on any leadership roles. Don't publicly speak. Don't raise your voice so loud so that you won't be safe." Didn't quite work out that way. It was a time when we didn't feel safe, when walking on the streets meant you'd be harassed or cursed at, when someone would say, "Hey, when are you going to blow something up?" or "Go back to your own country," or throw things at us. And so I learned to smile and be pleasant when I'm interacting with strangers, not make eye contact with someone that seemed uncomfortable with me, and to speak in English if my parents called me, because God forbid I say "Assalamu alaikum Abu" in a public space. There was a time when a lot of Muhammads became known as Mo, and myself as Fatima instead of Fatima, which is the correct pronunciation of my name. And so I think of it as giving up parts of our identities to try to fly under the normal radar as much as we could. We adapted. We denied part of ourselves just to survive. Sometimes with the political climate in the US, it feels like we're reliving this. On days after weeks with like the New Zealand shooting, I question the spaces that I think I belong in, and I wonder if I'm still safe where I think I am. The narrative of growing up Muslim in a post-9/11 America is one that hasn't been told enough, and this is the first time that I'm speaking publicly about it. It's one that can be difficult to relate to if you haven't heard the stories, experienced it, or known someone who talks about it. So today, I'd like to take you on a small glimpse of what that journey looks like, of growing up and living in a country that sometimes leads with prejudice instead of empathy, and to talk about how the truth is that the options that we have and the choices that we can make are limited by who we are and how we identify ourselves, and you don't have to be Muslim to understand that. As we go through these stories, there's a couple of things that I'd like you to think about. If you feel compelled to make a certain choice, think about where and why that comes from, where and why that's coming from. If a choice seems ridiculous or strange to you, also try to think about why that is. If these stories make you uncomfortable, don't panic. That's a really good thing. That implies that you're dealing with something that's challenging what you know to be normal. And when you're challenging that, that's good, because that means we're expanding our perspective. So, to change things up a little, we're going to do a little activity. A couple of weeks ago, I was at the New York City School of Data conference where Khalid, the data officer for the city of New York, did this activity with the crowd. It requires everyone to stand up. Please get out of your seats. This is a cheesy activity. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is raise your hands to the sky. Great. Wow, everyone's really participatory. And then I'm going to ask you to tiptoe and raise a little bit more. That's all I got. You can sit down now. Just a reminder that you can always reach a little bit higher. That takes us to the next part of our keynote, which is, oh no, the choose your own adventure. So if you'll all take out your mobile device or a laptop or anything that has internet connectivity and go to Midcamp, mid.camp/keynote, you'll see our Slido page. There's a test poll. So if we could just get everyone to vote in the test poll just to make sure everyone is able to access Slido. For this part of the keynote, I'm going to present you with a scenario. Each scenario will have 1 or 2 or 3 choices. You'll make a choice. We'll look at what everyone chooses, and then I'll walk through what I would choose in that scenario based on a true story, and also why I would choose those choices. So I'll give everyone a couple of minutes to make sure that they're on Slido, and if you're having any trouble, Midcamp team will help you. Thank you. I don't have any hellos or waves yet. That's funny. Is it hard to see the choices?
Yeah, well, it doesn't pop to that screen.
Yeah. Ooh.
It flips to get asked a speaker question and then 0, 1.
So that poll is not active. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, I get the boarding your flight.
Sorry. Yeah. Went ahead. Try to refresh now and you should see test poll. Yeah, sorry about that. Also, like, Slido, your embed is not accessible at all. Oh my god, it's live changing! Thank you, Michael Hess, for giving me your Slido subscription for this. We were looking at all the Node.js tools that we could possibly build for live polling, and I was like, I can't. So this is great. Is there anyone who isn't able to vote or is having trouble with Slido? Don't want to leave anyone behind. Yes?
It says enter code here.
Enter code? Oh, Abby's to the rescue.
It's 107 people.
Is that what we've got in terms of this morning?
About that, yeah.
Awesome, okay. Alright, so if everyone's voted, I'm going to close that poll and move on. That takes us to our first scenario, which is boarding your flight. Here it is. You're sitting on the exit row from a flight from Toronto Pearson to LaGuardia next to a middle-aged white woman. Your father calls to wish you a safe flight, ending the call with Allah Hafiz, which means God protect you, and is the equivalent of bye for Muslims. The flight attendant comes over to explain the exit row procedure in both English and French, because it's Air Canada. In case of emergency, your neighbor is visibly uncomfortable and asks the flight attendant to please change your seat because she's afraid that you won't comply with the emergency procedures and you'll put the rest of the passengers in danger. The flight attendant thinks about it and looks around, but you already know the gate checked your bag and that flight is really full. So what would you do? A, stand up for yourself, or B, don't make any waves. Stand up for yourself could take the form of trying to reason with the woman who's afraid, reassuring her, or speaking to the flight attendant about how unfair the request is. Any form of pushing back, that would be choice A. Choice B would be not saying anything and remaining agreeable, smiling to whatever decision the flight attendant takes. Try not to make any requests and just do as you're told. I'm gonna activate the poll so that you can go back and make your choice. And I'll give everyone 2 minutes-ish to do that. This is also going to be an interesting experiment for me because I admittedly have a lot of assumptions about what people are going to pick. But one thing I would say is don't think of this as choosing for me, but choosing for you. And I think that's where we will get most of the impact from seeing what everyone picks. Ooh, the counter. 99 votes are in. 103.
Websites are cool.
Yeah, this is really, it's real time. I'm very impressed. Things you can do with money. It's true. When we were talking about this polling thing, Michael said, like, if you can build me an open source solution, I would be so happy to use it. And I was like, great. When should I, do you have, how many was the first one?
12.
Okay, so we've got 2 more votes than the test poll, so that's exciting. I'm going to go ahead and vote for myself. So we've got standing up for yourself at 69% and don't make any waves at 31%. I'll let that sink in for a bit. What? Slides.
If you vote, it'll show the results.
Oh, okay, so they've seen them. Great. All right, so I'm going to tell you what happens when you make that choice, based on a true story. Standing up for yourself escalates the situation. So after some arguing ensues with you or the woman or you and the flight attendant, you're likely going to be taken off the plane unless you put up some money, like $200 for an upgrade to business class, which you likely don't have or don't want to because you're so humiliated and angry at that point. Choice B, the flight attendant offers the woman an upgrade because you're complying and she doesn't think it's a problem. And so the woman pays an extra $40 to move a couple of seats ahead of you. But you're still on the same plane and you're still in the exit row. So let that sink in for a bit. This is what actually happened to me. This woman paid $65 to sit in a Comfort Plus seat so she wouldn't have to sit next to me. You may have noticed in this scenario that there were only two choices, and there were very, very extreme choices. The person that I worked with to write up these scenarios and I felt that this was to do this on purpose. There are two choices, one is aggressive and one is really passive, and it kind of reflects the reality of the situation. You're on a plane, it's really tense, and there's this moment of tension where you have to decide, like, fight or flight, literally. It's not over, and to give a little bit of context, getting to the airport, going through security, praying that you have a Nexus card and you still don't get flagged, but sometimes I still get flagged. Eventually getting on the plane, like, your battle has not ended. You need to actually land that flight. So things like this happen a lot. Sometimes they happen when I'm in the security lane where someone throws a shoe at me. Sometimes it happens on the plane where someone doesn't want to sit next to me. Sometimes it happens in the line if I'm boarding before my zone is called and someone says, "You immigrant, don't you know you're not in zone 2? So things like this happen, and now that I'm traveling a lot for Drupal events, they happen a little bit more often. But there have been times where other people have spoken up for me, more so lately, like people will, step in between me and the person that's being rude, things like that. So it's not over once you're on the airplane, and just be a little bit of conscious that if you see this happening, you stepping in to kind of diffuse the situation would be helpful. Also, one thing that I was thinking in this particular scenario that happened was when the flight attendant was thinking, I was thinking, okay, is the flight attendant going to be neutral? Is the flight attendant also afraid of me? Because if the flight attendant has their own bias, then I'm basically screwed. But if the flight attendant thinks about it and thinks that this woman is being unreasonable and doesn't have a real reason to be afraid of me, then there's a chance that we might come to a resolution. So these are the kinds of things that go through my mind in a situation like that. I'm going to deactivate this poll, and we're going to move on to the next scenario. Is everyone feeling okay? Yeah, great. Next scenario is taking groceries home. This happened in Boston, for context, because the transit system there sucks. It was the week after your father recovered from a bad case of the flu. So after work, you headed over to the farmer's market to get some groceries and a lot of chicken to make chicken soup. You got on the bus home carrying 2 very large tote bags, and you zipped them because raw chicken stinks. A man was watching you, and before he did anything, he got up and went and talked to this driver first. I guess the driver told him that there's nothing I can do, man. And then he approached you, said you looked dangerous, and demanded that you either get off the bus or show him what's in your bag. And at this point, the man is screaming. People in the bus are kind of like trying not to make eye contact with me because they're just like, oh shit, shit's going down. Oh no, I cursed and my dad's gonna watch this. Sorry, Dad. So this guy demands that you show him what's in your bags or you get off the bus. And for context, you know that if you get off this bus, you have to walk for half an hour to take the train that takes you home. And you are carrying a lot of grocery. So I've activated the poll. Your first choice is open your bags for him to take a look. Let him see that it's chicken, and you're on your way. Or B, just get off at the next stop, because you can't put up with this. Give you a couple minutes to get your votes in. And feel free to discuss it. Yeah, why not? Agile. I talk fast. Oh, is there an option C and I never edited the poll?
No, they're making it.
What would you like option C to be?
Get him to get off the bus.
Yeah. Do you want me to put that option? Do people in this room, you don't have to raise your hand, you can just go like, yes, want an option C for telling the guy to get off the bus?
Yeah.
Wow.
Alright, I'm editing the poll, so let's see. Tell him to get off the bus.
Cheerfully tell him.
Oh, cheerfully? Cheerfully. Just to be transparent, I don't have an end scenario for that, but we can talk about it.
I know you don't have a
Wow, the votes are going from B to C. Look at that. 110 votes are in. Can someone demonstrate cheerfully telling someone to get off the bus?
How about you get off the bus? I feel sorry for your problem, but you could help by getting off the bus too.
Here, I push the yellow button for you and the doors are open. Wouldn't
I
it
want
be?
you to feel comfortable by riding along with me, so
Yeah.
it's a free country, you can use the door. And I won't even let you on the way out.
Please, for the people in the back, someone in the front said you can tell them it's a free country, you can just use the door, and I'll make sure they don't hit you on the way back. Love those buses. Especially when the bus door opens and there's like a giant hunk of snow and you're like thinking about, what do? I need to jump into the snow. And then the doors start closing before you're done thinking. At one point I was like, oh no, the doors are closing. Tried to get out of the bus. My backpack got stuck on the inside of the doors, and so I was like, oh god. Yeah, it was pretty comical. And then once I did get off, I was like, nobody saw that, okay? Like, so we've got 113 votes in, which is too short of what we had in the last poll. So I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna make my lecture. Great.
You can only do cheerfully, so we know what you're doing.
So like for more context, the true story here was the year after the Boston Marathon bombing. And so I was living in Boston, working for the city of Boston, and I had a lot of pride because sometimes I'd be on the bus and someone behind me would be like looking at the city of Boston website, like paying their parking ticket, and I was like, I built that. So like, as you can imagine, like getting into a scenario like this on the bus, you kind of just want to spitball and be like, I built your website, come on, you know, so just to keep that in mind. All right, we're gonna go over the scenario responses. A, if you open the bags for him to take a look, he picks through your bags, he looks at the groceries, he realizes that it's chicken and vegetables, and quietly goes back to his seats, but doesn't apologize. You get off at the next stop. If you're me, you're crying at this point. You carry your groceries several blocks to get that Orange Line train to get back to Charlestown. It takes you half an hour longer to get home. You're exhausted, you want to talk about it. If you're me, you probably posted a long rant on Facebook about it. And then you just have to go and make that soup because your dad's sick. What's interesting about this scenario is that neither of these is really the ending. So this is what happens right after, right? But the ending looks like this. You tell people what happened that day on the bus. They're outraged and they're concerned for you. They keep asking, why didn't you stand up to this guy? He was irrational. Why did you not tell him to take another bus? Why not be brave and fight your accusers as they come? You may have noticed that the end point is the same. This is because no matter what, you're still going to get home with your stuff. But it's what happens in that interaction that really affects what you're left with. Every time I get on a bus now, I check myself. It's what my friend and I call the getting on the bus mental checklist for a Muslim. So, am I smiling? Do I look approachable? Is my bag too big? And things like that. So like before I get on the bus, I'm basically doing what other people do to me so that I feel safer and better and more comfortable getting on this bus because I'm not flagging any of those very obvious radars that people have. Right, sorry, I got the checklist wrong. It's the mental checklist for boarding public transport while Muslim, to be written. So if everyone's feeling good, we're gonna move on to the next and last scenario. Thumbs up?
Thumbs up.
Great, we are doing really well on time. All right, I am just gonna double check that I updated the poll on this one. This one was a lot harder to do because, and I'll talk about this a little later, but the original story had about, it's what we call the go back choice. So I did choice A, then I went back, then I did choice B, then I went back. There was a C, a D, and an E, and I went to my screenwriter and I was like, this is how it actually went down. And she was like, this is not possible to do in a presentation. It requires too many branches. And so this is a modified version, but if anyone wants to chat about it, let me know and I'll take a moment in the results to talk about what really happened. So here's your next scenario. You have just started a new job, and you'd like to do your prayers at work on your lunch break. It only takes around 5 minutes. There's no HR person at this company yet because they're pretty small, and you don't really feel like asking your coworkers yet because you're new, you moved here, they helped you get set up. You've already asked for so many things. So you know that feel where you're like, I can't ask for one more thing anymore. And so ideally, you just like a really low-key place, like a corner where nobody goes to pray and just quickly get it over with before anyone notices. So you've got a couple of choices here. A, you pray in the storage room under the stairs. For some context, there's a basement. You go down the stairs, there's 3 bathrooms, and then there's one like broom closet that isn't a bathroom and is pretty clean. So you can pray there. You can pray in an extra conference room. Caveat, they have glass windows and glass doors and glass everything. And C, not B, sorry, typo, ask a manager for help. You have a team lead and you just met, but you could just go there and ask him about it. So I'm gonna activate the poll. Oh, y'all are so fast. Just to be transparent, y'all are proving my assumptions correct. And I'm gonna wait for 115 votes to come in, but feel free to chat about it. We thought this would be a good scenario to sort of wrap the scenarios up with, because this one is sort of near and dear to all of us. We all work at workplaces. We all need to ask for accommodations in different ways, whether it's holidays, whether it's a sick leave. So when you think about this, don't think about specifically about praying, but think about it as making accommodations for people who need them. Like Midcamp has a mother's room, and if you noticed on their slides for the party on, was it Saturday night or Friday night? Friday night, they also pointed out that if non-alcoholic spaces are your thing, like, let's chat. And things like that are really important. And so this story sort of speaks to that mindset. My Twitter is off the hook. So like 10 minutes before the keynote, my dad was like, can we FaceTime? And I was like, Dad, you don't understand technology. That means you'll be on the screen the whole time. So now he's messaging him. He's like, how's it going? And it's like, I'm speaking. Like, you want me to take a break? Let me text my dad.
Hey, if he wants to, that's fine.
If he wants to be FaceTime? All right, next version of this, my dad will be live tweeting. I think he would cry in the beginning, point out typos in the second half, and just like fervorously nod to the third section. Very predictable. So we've got 112 votes in, so I'm gonna move on. And I place my vote. Yes, I prayed in the storage room. So as you can see, overwhelming majority on asking a manager for help, and then praying in the storage room under the stairs, which is what I did, and then praying in the empty conference room near your desk. All right, so if you decided to pray in the storage room under the stairs like I did, it's dark and dusty, but it's private, and you like it for that reason. A couple of people will come up and down the stairs to go to the bathroom, and if they see you standing in the closet facing the wall, they will try to talk to you because they're concerned about, you know, what's happening. But as soon as you like go through the rest of the prayer motions, they're like, oh no, sorry, Fatima. And there's this little bit of awkwardness where I would sometimes giggle because it was too funny. Some people would stop and start talking about the thing they were talking about when they were at my desk. So like, yeah, so the client said, I'd be like, please, I pray. So that was fun. But then my boss messaged me and said, hey, that place that I think you're praying, it's gonna be another bathroom. So they're starting remodeling next week, so you're gonna have to figure out where to go. And he suggests another room, which is on the second floor. If you selected choice B and decided to pray in an empty conference room near your office or your desk, there's a lot of typos. So you have to walk down the hall past your boss's office to get to this conference room that's free. He's always really surprised to see you and says hello every time you stop by and asks you what you're doing. And you're like, oh, hey, yeah, I'm good. I'm just gonna go pray. And this happens like 3 or 4 times a week, and it's hella awkward. The conference room itself, like I mentioned, has glass walls, so sometimes people come in when you're praying and start talking to you because they're not sure what's going on. Sometimes people stop by the glass and stare for a second because they're a little bit confused. This goes on until someone finds out and lets you know that maybe you should put a sign that says quiet, prayer in progress on the window. It's quite possibly the most awkward thing that you've experienced, so you're thinking maybe I should figure something else out. And finally, like you all would like to do, you ask a manager for help. This is with the assumption that you have rapport with your manager, so if you're new at your job, like, this is very, very low probability, but you plan to reach out your team lead and you wait for a good opportunity because you've already asked for a lot of accommodations. Luckily, at the end of the week, your team lead has a check-in with you and says, is there anything you need? And this is the opportunity that you've been waiting for. So you tell him about needing a low-key place to pray. He offers his office, and he says, don't worry about everybody else. I'll talk to them. I'll let them know what's going on, so that they don't act weird. And he takes that initiative, which is super helpful, and also takes the burden off you for having to explain to everyone what you're doing. Note that for each of these scenarios, there was a different endpoint. And this is because of what I was talking about a little bit earlier, where this wasn't exactly how this went down. So what really happened, and this was at Echidna, shout out, they did really well. I went and prayed in the storage room under the stairs. Andrew told me that it was a bathroom, it was going to become a bathroom. He said, go to the actual storage room, which is like a garage with a door, and it's a really heavy door, so no one will hear you if you want to pray out loud. Weird assumption. So I went and prayed there until one day one of our marketing managers walked in to come get some of those jerseys that we wear for a camp. And I'm praying and he walks in and I'm like, oh crap. And so he awkwardly messages me on Slack and says like, hey, like that place is dusty and it's a storage room and there's no ventilation. There's like this space on the second floor. It's like everybody comes up the stairs, there's like a big landing, and then there's the door to the second floor. Why don't you try to pray there? And I was like, oh, that place is clean, well lit, it's got a window. And so I relocate to the second floor, but what happens is when people go for coffee breaks, they walk right behind me, and there's this awkward moment where they're chatting as they open the door. The chatting goes, just praying, oh, okay, sorry. And then they're like, sorry, as they walk by. And then they message me and I'm like, really sorry. And every time somebody messaged me, I like copy paste the same, like, it's okay, it's chill, I don't mind if you're talking, I don't mind if you're walking behind me, literally I don't mind, just let me pray. And then someone in that, inside of the door, Jay, who was our content strategist, was like, hey, why don't you come in the other side and put up this quiet prayer in progress sign I made for you. And now nobody will use this door to go through it, and instead they'll see the sign and they'll go through the other entrance, so no one will walk behind you and no awkwardness on either part. So I tried to do this for a while. This required me to go to the second floor, walk past everyone who's like, hey, what are you doing here? Hey, nice to see you again. And put up the sign, open the door and go pray, then walk back in, take down the, it wasn't gonna happen. I did it a few times and then eventually I would just go up the other side and pray without putting up the sign, and then again, awkwardness. So I talked to Jay about it and he was like, try talking to our new HR person appears. So then I talked to the HR person and she said there is a new office with no windows that we're gonna use as a conference room. Caveat, it's at the end of a long hallway where all of senior management sits, and they have glass-walled offices. And so I was like, okay, I'll try this. And this is one of the choices that we did earlier, where I would walk past the marketing manager, the vice president of the company, and everybody would literally stop me and be like, hey, how's it going? And I'd be like, hey, what are you doing on this floor? Just go into the quiet room to pray. And eventually I was just so mortified to do that every day that I was like, I can't do this anymore. And the HR was like, well, there's a shortcut. So if you go to the other side, walk through the bathroom, you only have to pass 2 offices. And I was like, can't do it. Especially because one of those offices, bless his soul, Victor, I'm sure most of you know Victor from Digital Echidna, it's his office. And Victor is just, he's such a nice person and he's so kind. And he literally just wants to say, hey, what's up? But I don't think he quite understood what effect that was having on me as I was like trying to like squirrel my way into the conference room. So eventually, my team lead sits me down, and this is Travis, and I recently moved to his team, and he's like, is there anything you need? Like, we're in a new office, anything about the environment that I can help you with? And he's very intuitive about this. And I explained to him, like, here is the background, the 5 choices I made and where I am now. And so Travis and I share like a corner of the office where we joke about putting a sofa. And he says to me, why don't you just pray there? And if anybody like says anything, I'll just look at them. And Travis is this like very intimidating guy with a beard and a baseball cap. If someone's talking really loud and he looks over, they just like, and I was like, you know what? This is the best solution yet. And so in one of our team stand-ups, he tells the team, Fatima's gonna pray here. Y'all don't have to worry about it. Don't talk to her when she's praying, but feel free to resume your humanly activities and don't act weird. And so this worked really well for me for a while until I left Echidna. But I think this was the single most like successful journey I had in finding a prayer room. But people do it in different ways. For example, at Midwest Dev Summit, the first hour that I arrived, Michael Hess takes me down and introduces me 3 different prayer rooms with different levels of visibility and gives me the key, and he's like, these 3 are for you for this weekend. Wherever you need to pray, whenever you need to pray, do it. And so I always think of that as an example of like, if you know someone is coming to your camp or to your office, or you're hiring someone who is visibly Muslim, like, ask them if they need a prayer room. Ask them if they need special accommodation. Ask them when Eid is. Maybe they need time off. Like, talk about Ramadan, because my coworkers didn't know about Ramadan. So the first year I was just low-key fasting and like, no, I'm good, I'm not hungry. No, I'm good, I don't want to drink water. It's like, your throat's pursed. That's okay, I don't want to talk about it. And the second year I prepared a slide deck. I was like, at here in general, this is the slide deck. And then my manager reached out, and she was great. And she was like, do you need to accommodate like different timings? Like we have a 7:30 to 2 o'clock schedule. And I was like, yes. Because at 2 o'clock my brain is mush because I haven't eaten anything all day. And so things like that are great if you can get ahead of them, take initiative, support the people that are in the room. And I'm sure that there are accommodations for people who are not Muslim, like mothers and like quiet rooms and mother rooms and things like that. So just something to keep in mind. And I thought that if you could remember any one of my stories, this one would probably be the most close to home for a lot of people. Great. So, drink water. How am I on time? Does it end at 10:30?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we're reaching the last half, last third of this presentation set. So for this last half, I'm gonna go over a couple of strategies or talking points or things that I'd like you to think about. The idea is that you don't have to absorb all of them or do all the things I tell you to do, but take one and go with it. And so I'm closing all the other polls, and I'm leaving open a poll that's called open to one takeaway. And so at any time during the next like 6 slides, if you feel like that's the thing that I have the capacity to do, or that's the thing I'm gonna think about doing, or that's the thing that I'm gonna explore to see if I'm ready to do it, please just drop that in there. It's an open text field, and I would love to hear which one of the things that I talked about really struck you the most. Because I'm not you, and you're not me, and so this is how we learn from each other. Great. So, all of those sad stories and fun stories being said, how can we do better? I'm going to share a couple of things in which I think we can be more inclusive of people in shared spaces like this one. The pace of this section is a little faster, so don't feel compelled to do everything, learn everything, or write everything down. What I'd like for you to do is listen and feel, and really like listen to your heart of hearts and see what really strikes you the most. Okay, so if everyone's ready, we're going to get started. Great. First, we're going to talk about belonging. So everyone has a need for validation and connection with others, and this need that we all want to be unique. And belonging meets this need. It includes yourself, you get accepted, and you also get valued for who you are. I attended a conference in Canada, hosted by the Canadian Digital Service, and it was called Diversity and Inclusion in Digital Services. Wow. And in her keynote, Hillary Hartley shared a really interesting point, which was, we all hear about this metaphor of diversity and inclusion, where it's like, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance, and she added, and belonging is being on the committee and deciding the venue, the food, and the music. So I really like thinking about it in that way. The first tip that I have is find time to tell our stories. Sharing stories with each other helps us build connections, helps us build empathy, and it helps foster that sense of belonging. And sometimes it's really hard to tell your own story. And to do that, there's something that my team does in introductions to really higher level management, like when we're doing big presentations. We're like 3 young women in government, and so we're talking to drone pilots and aviation and pilots, and these are people who are ex-military, so they're like these big hulky guys like Bruce who talk like this. Legit, like Bruce, the first day I met him, he was like, nice to meet you, and then he said, by the way, I'm a pilot, I worked in the Iran war, and then he's like, I've dropped bombs on people, and I was stunned. I was like, is it just me? Like, what if I was from Afghanistan where you dropped bombs? Like, and that kind of introduction made me realize, and that was in our first week at Transport, I was like, oh boy, like we're gonna have to find a way to quickly establish credibility with these people because they see us as kids, because we're young women. And so one of the things that my team does to do this is we swap introductions. So each person gets a slide, we put down our professional experience, things that we're working on, and what we're bringing to this drone project that we're working on. And so I'll introduce Jen, Jen will introduce Andy, and Andy will introduce me. And in this way, like, it's so easy for people to say good things and to establish credibility about someone else. And it's a lot harder to do that for yourself if you haven't had to build up, if you haven't had that like build up of confidence and self-esteem. So this is like one technique. I'm sure there's lots more and that you can think about it. And so sharing our stories, but also really listening to the stories that our peers have. And for this, my notes are out of sync. So I am gonna have to do it on the fly. So there were two stories in the room that I wanted to share. And one was, David, where you at? David does this thing it's called One Winter Night. I'm doing this without notes, where you stay for 12 hours in downtown in winter, correct me if I'm wrong, to kind of simulate the feeling of homelessness and when you don't have shelter. And he does this almost every year, and he raises money and builds like the tent and stays in it. And I think that's a story that needs to be shared more and that we should all be listening to. Another story that's in the room, Anya is maybe... So Anya is known for giving really, really technical talks about backend symphony, about migrations, about layout builder. But what you don't know is that Anya is from Ukraine. And she gave a really amazing talk at Digital Echidna about building an inclusive culture within work. And talking about different things from like how coming from Ukraine to Canada, like, and this is a direct quote, but like the button in the bus to pick the stop, that looks like an electrical component. Why would you press that? And so to give credit to Anya, like these are conversations that you can have with her that you wouldn't know if she had the chance to share that story. That would be really great. So really listen to the stories of your peers, and when you hear something that seems like something you don't know about someone, ask them about it. Hear more about it. Value them for it. Next one is learn the language, use the language. I'm going to say a word, and you're going to have to raise your hand and tell me if it makes you cringe. Privilege. Me too. If that word makes you uncomfortable, really think about why that is and where that comes from. In full honesty, 2 years ago when I first met the Drupal Diversity folks and I saw the word privilege in Slack, I would like Google it again and again and again because I was like, I think I know what this means, but it makes me feel really weird. And apparently I have to talk about it, and if I'm part of this group, I think I should know what that means. Like good, solid understanding. Like, I know what the word ice cream means, like, solid. But the word privilege, it's an uncomfortable word, and the way to get around that is to do your research, read about it, make it feel okay. It's just a word, and it signifies a lot of really important things when talking about inclusion. So when you feel uncomfortable, don't stop there. There's more. There's a whole pot of gold at the end of that. And it's okay not to know because we're all learning and we can all do our research. Emphasis here on do, because it's important if you don't know something, you can go and do your research. If you know someone and they feel comfortable telling you about it, ask them, do you feel comfortable talking to me about this? Do you feel comfortable if we have a conversation about inclusion? Can you tell me more about, why you choose to identify a certain way and how environments make you feel? Ask them. It's okay for a person to say, no, sorry, I don't feel comfortable. But give them that option to explain it to you if you would like to. Do your research and try to be really, really generous when it comes to uncomfortable conversations, not only to the people that you're asking, but also to yourself, because this stuff's not easy. One example that I saw on Twitter last night, actually, when I was designing my slides, turns out I'm not very good at CSS, but there's an advanced CSS talk this weekend. Was this. I say hey guys all the time and have to correct myself, and it surprised me how many like replacements there were for hey guys that I hadn't thought of, like hey peeps, hey folk, hey folks, hey all, hey crew, hey pals. And so thinking about like, let's not get fixated on the fact that we always use the word guys and try to like be generous and understand that we could slowly improve to using something else. Amplify the unheard voices. Give someone a spotlight at your camp. Hey, Midcamp! If you have a loud voice or you have a platform, use it, and use it to give someone else a spotlight that isn't usually heard or has a story that you've never heard before. Consider your environment and embrace who's missing. Not literally, okay? Don't go around saying Fatima told you to go give hugs at camps. But metaphorically, one story that comes to mind was at a Drupal camp welcome dinner, and I won't tell you who it is, but we were at the welcome dinner at this restaurant, and the organizer got a call from the person who was in a wheelchair who couldn't figure out how to get into this restaurant. And then the organizer went out, talked to the restaurant, and it turns out it wasn't accessible. And the rest of us sat there and ate our dinner and chatted, and that person went home. And I have no clue how we all digested our food because that was awful. Don't do that. Try not to do that. Make an active effort not to do that. When you're at an event, take a look around. Who's there? Who's missing? Is there only alcohol to drink? This has happened. Is it too loud for anyone to actually hear what you're saying? Is it too loud for you to hear what you're thinking? What kind of food is available? If it's on the weekend or late night, is there childcare? So there's a lot of ways to build an inclusive event, and I'm sure you could talk to Midcamp organizers about that because they do a pretty good job. Acknowledge that oppression is constant. Some of you may not like to hear this, but it is. I wish there was a switch that I could turn off and on depending on the day so I could walk out and just be a normal person and be treated like a normal person. But the reality is that's not an option for me. So if you're an ally and if you're someone that wants to make this world a better place and can live your life without worrying about all the things I worry about when I get on a plane and get on a bus, walk into a room, have a large bag, think about the fact that for me, it's constant. And the more you do for me, the more you build your environments at work, at home, in camps, at meetups, at events, the easier it is for me to live my life on a daily basis. And relatedly, you don't have to understand to help someone feel safe. I've been thinking a lot about how we don't really have to understand what being marginalized feels like. I have a unique perspective in that I'm Muslim and I'm visibly hijabi, but there are other types of marginalization. There's identities, there's orientations, there's different countries that people come from, there's skin color, there's all of that. And so I can't necessarily understand what all of those people go through, but I can take steps to make them feel safe. One thing that I had in my notes is when something bad happens or when something seems obviously uncomfortable, instead of saying, "Are you okay?" I've learned to say, "What do you need?" or "What can I do?" Choose empathy. There was one time when I went back to Fresh Meadows, so this is like middle of my college career, visiting my parents. I was living in the dorms, and I went to the local library, and I saw Gloria. At least I think it was Gloria. She was working as a library assistant, and she was like sorting books and laughing. And when she laughed, I was like, "That's Gloria. Oh my God, what am I gonna do?" And I had this moment where I was like, I have all these things that I want to say to you, and part of which is that you've brought me to a place where I can talk about these things because you're kind of the metaphor for the thing that I went through. But I realized that all of that wasn't really important, and maybe Gloria wasn't at a place where she would understand. And maybe it was good to kind of let go of that story and tell it here at Midcamp instead, or tell it at some future point at that point, and use that story to grow myself as a person. I do hope that no other little Muslim girl goes through that after, you know, Trump's presidency, or New Zealand shootings or other, you know, manifestos that get published. And I hope that we can all do our part to choose empathy whenever possible. That's not to say that you don't, but to do it actively looks very different from doing it unconsciously. And remember that everyone wants to be valued for who they are. And keeping that in mind helps people be a lot more empathetic. And finally, this wouldn't be an inclusion presentation if I didn't do a spiel for DD&I. Help us do the work together. DD&I wants to make this community, not computer, a safer, more inclusive space. We run meetings, we create space for these difficult, uncomfortable conversations. We share resources, and we try to advocate for the voices in the community that aren't heard. We have so many initiatives this year. We're helping people contribute through our Contrib team. DDI Careers is helping people make successful career moves where they're happy and satisfied with their jobs, and we support individuals at every level of the contribution journey. Come do the work. We're at DrupalDiversity.com or in the hashtag diversity-inclusion channel in the Drupal Slack. Time check. Okay, finally, let's take a moment to celebrate. Wow, I just did my first keynote. So when I reached out to Abby, I was like, I have this idea for a presentation. It's for the community tag. It's like this half-baked idea about talking about privilege without actually talking about privilege. And he was like, great, I'll take it to the team, and came back and was like, want to do a keynote? And I sat there and I was like, it's 10 p.m., maybe I'm not reading right. And so I was really at a loss, and I went home and, sorry about the formatting of these videos, but this is my Instagram story for the night, where my living room is covered in postcards of all of the phrases, things, words, ideas that I wanted to share. And then I called up some friends and I was like, I have a problem. I've been asked to speak about community stuff, and I can't decide what to speak about because this is the first time someone has asked me to share my story. And so let that sink in. There's a million other stories on my wall and a million other stories on every wall of every person, and we have to do more to listen to these. Finally, Michael Hess tells me that I am the youngest keynote speaker at Midcamp and possibly the first hijabi speaker. Also at DrupalCon, I'm one of 2 hijabis. I have not met a third one. I'm looking forward to Seattle. And so thank you all for being present, for listening, and for contributing through the polling and taking, coming along with me on this crazy journey of doing a choose your own adventure based on my life. And thank you all to these wonderful people who helped make this keynote awesome. I have some time. Laura helped me with doing this Choose Your Own Adventure. Midcamp team helped me do this. My coworkers listened to me present this, like mumbling at my desk. And Nikki and Greg helped me figure out what are the 3 things you want to say. And I was like, it's not 3, but thank you for trying. And Serena helped me last night with CSS. It was literally like that GIF where like that guy's like pulling the blinds and the blinds are getting all messed up and I'm like, I can't CSS. And Anna yesterday gave me space at her office to finish my slides. And that leaves us with 7 minutes for questions. And don't forget to go back to the Slido and put in 1 takeaway. And I just want to leave this up there. I saw this last night in Chicago, and it really hit home for me. It was a drawing of a globe of the earth, and it just says, we all live here. And so I want to add to that, remember to value each other. Thank you. Smile! Great. Any questions? Yes.
So how do you know both outcomes of the plane scenario?
How do I know both outcomes of the plane scenario? I need to refresh my memory, because this has happened a few times. Oh, yes. So I was with my dad when I was about 13 years old on a Pakistani Airlines flight where we got taken off the plane. And because my dad is the type of person where if someone comes up to him in the middle of New York City, like even Times Square, and says, go back to your own country, he's like, by the way, my country is Pakistan and we're an atomic nuclear power. Do you really want me to go back to my own country? And I would be like, Dad, no, Dad, let's go! Yeah, and so my dad is the type of person who does not stand down in the face of any form of injustice. And so if you get stuck on a plane in that kind of scenario, my dad causes trouble. And he's the kind of person that in the other scenario, had he been on the bus, would have been like, I'm sitting. You can get off the bus if you're uncomfortable because you need to deal with your own feelings. And so that's that. And then I actually, when I was alone, this was, I think, 2 years ago, going to, I think, Drupal Camp, New Jersey is where I encountered the woman who wanted to upgrade her seat. Yes?
I have another option for your bus scenario. You could hand the guy a card and say, I know a good psychologist if you want to see one.
Just going to repeat that for the recording. Another scenario for the bus is you could hand the guy a card and say, I know a good psychologist if you need it. Passive aggressive.
You can handle it.
Back.
Give us a projection. Is it getting better or is it getting worse?
The question.
Let's say in the near term, the last couple of years.
The question is give us a projection. Is it getting better or is it getting worse? Like, let's say in the last couple of years. The good thing is, and I know that you've heard before probably, is that the more we talk about it, the better it gets. The more that we openly talk about it and make ourselves uncomfortable and have these difficult discussions, the more there will be people in the room that will take something away and go and have something good happen at their event or their workplace. There's a lot more women, female hijabi leaders now in politics, in journalism, in fashion, in comic writing. If you're interested, I know all of them on Twitter and can give you a list. And so yes, it's definitely getting better. It's days like, you know, the New Zealand shooting where, you know, people crawl out from under the rocks and say terrible things, or, you know, the days before Trump got elected and the rhetoric after his election, I think made things a little bit worse. So some days, because of political climate, I feel like we're going backwards, and then other days we, you know, rise from the ashes from that and do a lot better. And so there are definitely leaders and people and organizations that are doing a lot of great work, and to further this conversation. And not only, and so it's like, at some point you need to stop having the conversation and you need to start doing the work to do the things that you were talking about. And I think it is better in the sense from a couple of years ago, because now there are people doing the work and not just talking about it. 3 minutes. One thing I was thinking about when I was like timing myself for this presentation was like the idea that staying on time respects the time of the attendees. And as some of you are speakers, think about that. Yes.
Much longer than your 10-minute Pokemon.
Yes, I'm known for my Pokemon talk, which I think Midcamp is super transparent, so I can see all of your organizer Slack channels, just saying. And someone was like, I hope she can talk slower now. And I was like, I commit to doing better. But also, like, when it's a personal talk, you have to actually breathe, because otherwise you might burst into tears. So that has been really great. Great, I think there are no other questions, but know that I am here for the entire camp and not for all of Saturday though. So come talk to me if you would like to. Come in groups if you feel uncomfortable talking to me about this one-on-one. I'm happy to share more stories and more background and take feedback. I do want to give this presentation again, maybe more interactive, things like that. So thank you so much for contributing, for listening, and for being present here this morning.